you killed a police officer, a husband, a father, a man who dedicated his life to protecting this community. And you did it with a smile on your face, believing that your age would shield you from the consequences of your actions. Judge Richard Morrison's voice resonated through the packed Cook County Criminal Court in Chicago, Illinois, his words carrying a fury barely contained beneath judicial decorum. The date was August 15th, 2024, and the defendant standing before him, 17-year-old Marcus Williams, was about to discover that his confident assumptions about juvenile justice and lenient treatment were catastrophically wrong. The courtroom was filled beyond capacity. In the front row sat Officer Daniel Torres's widow, Rebecca Torres, flanked by the couple's 3 children, ages 8, 11, and 14, all dressed in their Sunday best, all with photographs of their father pinned to their clothing. Behind them sat dozens of police officers in full-dress uniform, their presence a silent testimony to the brotherhood of law enforcement and their demand for justice. On the opposite side of the gallery, Marcus's mother sat alone, her face a mask of grief and disbelief, isolated by the nature of her son's crime and the community's rage. Marcus himself stood at the defense table, his expression finally showing cracks in the arrogant facade he had maintained throughout his arrest, interrogation, and trial. At 17 years old, just months shy of his 18th birthday, when he committed the murder, Marcus had believed that the juvenile justice system would protect him, that he would receive a lenient sentence, that he might even be released by age 21. His attorney had tried desperately to disabuse him of these notions, but Marcus had remained confident, almost cocky throughout the proceedings, certain that his youth would save him. He was about to learn how wrong he had been. The jury has found you guilty of first-degree murder of a peace officer, Judge Morrison continued, his voice rising with intensity. They have found you guilty of armed robbery. They have found you guilty of felony firearm possession. And despite your defense attorney's passionate arguments about your age and your capacity for rehabilitation, that same jury has recommended that you be sentenced as an adult to natural life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Natural life without parole. It meant Marcus Williams would spend the rest of his life potentially 60, 70, or more years behind bars. He would never be released. He would grow old and die in prison. The confident smirk that had characterized his demeanor throughout the trial disappeared entirely, replaced by shock and dawning horror as the reality of his sentence penetrated his consciousness. This court accepts the jury's recommendation, Judge Morrison stated with finality. Marcus Williams, you are hereby sentenced to natural life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for the murder of Officer Daniel Torres. You will be remanded to the custody of the Illinois Department of Corrections immediately, where you will spend the remainder of your natural life. The courtroom erupted. Rebecca Torres and her children broke into sobs of relief. Police officers stood in solidarity. Spectators gasped at the severity of the sentence for someone so young. And Marcus Williams, who had walked into that courtroom believing his age would protect him, finally understood the magnitude of his crime and the terrible price he would pay for taking a police officer's life. But to understand how a 17-year-old high school dropout came to murder a decorated police officer in a crime so brazen and senseless that it would shock Chicago and lead to one of the harshest juvenile sentences in Illinois history. We must return to the beginning, to the early morning of November 3rd, 2023, and the events that would destroy multiple families and reignite fierce debates about juvenile crime, police safety, and appropriate punishment for young offenders who commit heinous acts. Marcus Williams had been born on December 8, 2005, in Chicago's South Side, an area plagued by poverty, gang violence, and systemic challenges that affected every aspect of community life. His father, Jerome Williams, had been incarcerated on drug charges when Marcus was 3 years old and remained in prison serving a 15-year sentence. His mother, Shanice Williams, worked 2 jobs as a nursing assistant during the day and a grocery store cashier at night, struggling to provide for Marcus and his younger sister, Destiny, age 12. Shanice did everything she could for those kids, testified Marcus's maternal grandmother, Dorothy Jackson, during the trial's sentencing phase. She worked herself to exhaustion, trying to keep them fed, clothed, housed. She tried to keep Marcus out of trouble, set rules, provide structure. But it was hard being a single mother in that neighborhood, working all the time, trying to keep her son away from the gangs and the violence. Despite Shanice's efforts, Marcus had been drawn into street life from a young age. He had been arrested for the first time at age 13 for shoplifting, had been caught with marijuana at 14, and had been suspended from school multiple times for fighting and defiance of authority. By age 15, he had dropped out of high school entirely, despite his mother's pleas that he continue his education. Marcus was smart when he applied himself. He could do well academically, testified his former 8th grade teacher, Michael Rodriguez. But he had no interest in school. He was more interested in projecting toughness, in being seen as someone not to be messed with. He talked constantly about making money on the streets, about how school was a waste of time, about how he was going to get rich and take care of his mother and sister. I tried to reach him, tried to show him that education was his path out of poverty. But he had already decided that the streets were his future. By age 17, Marcus was deeply involved in street-level drug dealing, working for a local gang that controlled several blocks in his neighborhood. He had been arrested twice more, once for possession of marijuana with intent to distribute and once for carrying a concealed weapon, but both times he had been processed through the juvenile system and received probation rather than incarceration. Marcus developed a sense of invincibility through the juvenile system, testified Dr. Sarah Martinez, a forensic psychologist who evaluated Marcus after his arrest. He had been arrested multiple times but never faced serious consequences. He served no jail time. He violated probation repeatedly without significant sanction. He came to believe that the system was toothless, that his age protected him from real punishment, that he could commit crimes without paying a meaningful price. This belief in his invulnerability would have fatal consequences on the morning of November 3, 2023. Officer Daniel Torres had been a Chicago Police Department officer for 12 years, assigned to the 7th District on the South Side, one of the city's most challenging and dangerous areas. At 38 years old, he was a decorated officer with multiple commendations for bravery and community service, known for his dedication to the neighborhood he served and his genuine efforts to build positive relationships with residents. Danny wasn't just a cop, he was a member of the community, testified his partner, Officer James Mitchell. He knew people by name. He played basketball with kids at the park. He helped elderly residents carry groceries. He could be tough when he needed to be, but he was fair and he genuinely cared about making the neighborhood safer and helping people. He was exactly the kind of officer we need more of. Daniel had joined the police department after serving 4 years in the Army, including a deployment to Afghanistan. He had returned home determined to serve his community and had specifically requested assignment to the South Side, despite it being one of the department's most dangerous postings. Danny could have transferred to a safer district multiple times, testified his supervisor, Sergeant Robert Foster. We offered him positions in lower crime areas, but he always refused. He said the South Side was where he was needed most, where he could make the biggest difference. He believed in the community and the people there. He wanted to be part of the solution to the violence and poverty. That dedication cost him his life. Daniel and his wife Rebecca had 3 children, Michael 14, Sarah 11, and Emma 8. He coached Michael's Little League team, attended all of Sarah's dance recitals, and never missed Emma's school events despite his demanding schedule. By all accounts, he was a devoted husband and father who balanced the stress of his dangerous job with deep commitment to his family. Danny was my everything, Rebecca testified during the trial, her voice breaking repeatedly. He was my best friend, my partner, the most amazing father our children could have asked for. He loved being a police officer. He believed he was making a difference, protecting people, helping the community. He never complained about the danger. He just kept showing up every day, doing his job, trying to make Chicago a little bit safer. And some kid killed him for no reason and took him away from us forever. The morning of November 3rd, 2023, began as a routine patrol shift for Officer Torres. He and his partner, Officer Mitchell, had been assigned to patrol several blocks known for drug activity, with instructions to maintain visible presence and respond to any calls in the area. At approximately 7:15 a.m., they received a call about a possible drug transaction in progress at the corner of 71st Street and South Prairie Avenue. We responded to the call and saw 2 individuals who matched the description from the caller, Officer Mitchell testified. We approached to conduct a field interview, which is standard procedure. We identified ourselves as police officers, asked for identification, and explained that we were responding to a call about suspicious activity. One of the individuals later identified as Marcus Williams immediately became hostile and confrontational. The dash cam footage from the patrol car, which would be played extensively during the trial, captured the entire encounter. The video showed Officers Torres and Mitchell exiting their vehicle and approaching Marcus Williams and another male, later identified as 19-year-old Darius Thompson. The officers were professional and calm in their initial approach. "Gentlemen, Chicago Police, we received a call about suspicious activity in this area. Can I see some identification, please?" Officer Torres's voice on the recording was calm and respectful, showing none of the aggression that Marcus would later falsely claim had provoked the shooting. The video captured Marcus's response, aggressive body language, confrontational posture, refusal to provide identification. "Man, we ain't doing nothing. Y'all always harassing us. We just standin' here. This is bullshit." His tone was hostile, designed to challenge the officer's authority. "I understand your frustration, but we're just doing our job. If you cooperate, this will only take a few minutes and you'll be on your way," Officer Torres responded, maintaining his professional demeanor despite Marcus's hostility. What happened next occurred in seconds, but would be analyzed frame by frame during the investigation and trial. As Officer Torres stepped closer to Marcus to continue the conversation, Marcus suddenly pulled a handgun from his waistband, a 9mm pistol that would later be traced to a robbery in Indiana, and fired 3 shots at point-blank range. The dash cam footage captured the shooting with terrible clarity. The first shot struck Officer Torres in the chest. The second shot hit him in the abdomen. The third shot, fired as Officer Torres was already falling, struck him in the neck. All 3 shots would prove fatal, though Officer Torres would survive for approximately 8 minutes before dying at the scene, despite desperate life-saving efforts by Officer Mitchell and arriving paramedics. The video also captured Marcus's reaction immediately after the shooting, not panic or remorse, but a calm, almost satisfied expression as he looked down at the fallen officer. "That's what you get," Marcus's voice could be heard saying on the recording. "Should have left me alone." Marcus and Darius then fled the scene on foot, running between buildings and disappearing into the neighborhood. Officer Mitchell immediately called for backup and emergency medical assistance while simultaneously trying to render aid to his dying partner. "Officer down! Officer down! 71st and Prairie, multiple gunshot wounds. Need ambulance immediately." Officer Mitchell's frantic radio transmission captured the chaos and desperation of the moment. The recording, played during the trial, was so emotionally powerful that several jurors were seen crying. The massive police response was immediate. Within minutes, dozens of officers had flooded the area, establishing a perimeter and beginning a manhunt for the shooter. Paramedics arrived within 4 minutes, but despite aggressive treatment, Officer Torres was pronounced dead at 7:27 a.m., approximately 12 minutes after the shooting. "I tried everything to save him," testified paramedic Lisa Chen, her voice breaking. "But the wounds were too severe. The shot to his neck had severed his carotid artery. He had lost too much blood. I knew within seconds of starting treatment that we were going to lose him, but we kept trying. We couldn't let him go without fighting. But there was nothing we could do. He died holding my hand, and his last words were asking me to tell his wife and kids that he loved them." The murder of a police officer triggered the largest manhunt in recent Chicago history. Hundreds of officers participated in the search for Marcus Williams, canvassing the neighborhood, interviewing witnesses, reviewing security camera footage from businesses in the area. The dash cam video provided clear images of Marcus's face, and within hours, police had identified him through facial recognition and database searches, showing his previous arrests. The identification of Marcus Williams as the shooter was straightforward, testified Detective Sarah Washington, who led the investigation. "We had clear video of his face, we had his voice on the recording, and his fingerprints in our database from previous arrests. We knew who we were looking for within 3 hours of the shooting. The challenge was finding him before he could flee Chicago or harm anyone else." The investigation also quickly identified Darius Thompson, who was arrested at his mother's apartment approximately 6 hours after the shooting. Darius cooperated immediately, providing a detailed statement about the events leading up to the shooting and Marcus's location. Darius told us that Marcus had been bragging about the shooting, Detective Washington testified. Marcus had told Darius that he wasn't worried about getting caught because he was only 17, and that even if he was arrested, he would just be in juvenile detention for a few years and then released. Marcus believed that his age would protect him from serious consequences. He was laughing about killing a cop, saying the system couldn't really touch him because he was a minor. This crucial testimony that Marcus had expressed the belief that his age would shield him from serious punishment would become central to the prosecution's argument that Marcus deserved to be tried as an adult and sentenced to the maximum penalty. His arrogant assumption that juvenile status would save him would be used to demonstrate his dangerous mindset and his unsuitability for rehabilitation in the juvenile system. Based on Darius's information, police located Marcus Williams at his girlfriend's apartment on the evening of November 3rd, approximately 14 hours after the shooting. A SWAT team was deployed to execute the arrest warrant given Marcus's demonstrated willingness to use deadly force. We treated the arrest as high risk given that Marcus had already killed one officer and had shown no hesitation to use his weapon, testified SWAT Commander Robert Martinez. We surrounded the building, established communication, and demanded that Marcus surrender. Initially, he refused, shouting that he wasn't going to prison, that they couldn't prove anything, that he was a juvenile and would be released soon anyway. After approximately 2 hours of negotiation, he surrendered without further violence. Marcus Williams was taken into custody at 9:47 p.m. on November 3, 2023, just over 14 hours after murdering Officer Daniel Torres. His arrest was broadcast live on local news channels, with images of the 17-year-old being led away in handcuffs becoming emblematic of the case. Even in custody, Marcus maintained an arrogant demeanor, smirking at cameras and appearing unconcerned about the severity of his situation. Marcus's demeanor during arrest and booking was disturbing, Detective Washington testified. He showed no remorse, no recognition of the gravity of what he had done. When booking officers asked him standard questions, he made comments like, "I'm only 17. I'll be out when I'm 21. And, "Y'all can't do shit to me. I'm a juvenile." He genuinely believed that his age would result in minimal consequences. The interrogation of Marcus Williams, conducted approximately 3 hours after his arrest with his mother and a juvenile advocate present as required by law, would provide additional evidence of his mindset and his stunning miscalculation about the legal consequences he faced. Detective Washington and her partner, Detective James Rodriguez, conducted the interrogation, which was video recorded per standard protocol. The recording would be played extensively during trial and would prove devastating to any sympathy Marcus might have generated due to his age. The detectives began by informing Marcus of his Miranda rights and confirming that he understood them. Marcus acknowledged understanding his rights, but chose to speak with detectives, apparently believing he could talk his way out of trouble or that nothing he said would matter given his juvenile status. "Marcus, we have video of you shooting Officer Torres," Detective Washington stated directly. "We have witnesses. we have the gun, which we recovered from your girlfriend's apartment. We know you did this. What we want to understand is why." Marcus's response was chilling in its casual tone and its revelation of his mindset. "Man, I ain't saying I did nothing. But hypothetically, if someone was in that situation, they were just defending themselves. You know, cops always harassing young brothers, always stopping us for nothing. Sometimes you gotta stand up for yourself." "By shooting a police officer?" Rodriguez pressed. "That's standing up for yourself?" "Like I said, I ain't saying I did it. But if someone did, they were protecting themselves. And anyway, I'm 17. I'm a minor. Even if I did do something, which I'm not saying I did, I'd just be in juvie for a few years. I'd be out by 21, maybe 25 max. I know my rights. I know how the system works. Y'all can't touch me the way you'd touch an adult." This statement, Marcus's explicit articulation of his belief that his age would protect him from serious consequences, would become one of the most frequently cited pieces of evidence during the trial. It demonstrated not just his guilt, but his dangerous combination of arrogance and ignorance about the legal system. Detective Washington confronted Marcus with the video evidence, explaining that the dash cam had captured everything. Marcus watched the footage, and his reaction was telling not horror or remorse, but mild irritation at being caught. "Okay, so maybe I did shoot him," Marcus finally admitted after viewing the video. "But he was hassling me, violating my rights, getting in my face. I felt threatened. That's self-defense, right? And I'm a juvenile, so even if they try to charge me, I'll do a few years in juvie and be out. I've talked to other guys who caught bodies, and they didn't do serious time because they were minors when it happened. The system goes easy on kids." Rodriguez attempted to correct Marcus's misunderstanding. "Marcus, you killed a police officer. This isn't shoplifting or drug possession. This is capital murder. You could be tried as an adult. You could get life in prison." Marcus's response revealed his complete failure to grasp the severity of his situation. "Nah, man, I'm 17. They can't do that. My cousin caught a murder charge at 16 and he was out at 23. I know how this works. Y'all trying to scare me, but I know my rights. I'm a juvenile. The worst I'll get is juvenile life, which means I'm out at 25. 7, 8 years max. I can do that standing on my head." His confidence was unshakable, his understanding of the law catastrophically wrong, and his lack of remorse disturbing. The interrogation continued for over 2 hours, with Marcus providing detailed admissions of shooting Officer Torres while simultaneously expressing confidence that his age would shield him from serious consequences. When I watched that interrogation, I couldn't believe what I was hearing, testified Assistant State's Attorney Jennifer Morrison, who would prosecute the case. Marcus was essentially confessing to murder while explaining why he thought he'd get away with it. He had no concept that murdering a police officer put him in a completely different category from typical juvenile offenses. He thought his age was a get-out-of-jail-free card. He was about to learn very differently. Based on Marcus's confession, the physical evidence and the video documentation of the shooting, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office filed first-degree murder charges against Marcus Williams on November 5, 2023, 2 days after Officer Torres's death. Simultaneously, prosecutors filed a motion to transfer Marcus's case from juvenile court to adult criminal court, a motion that would prove crucial to the eventual sentence Marcus would receive. Under Illinois law, juveniles aged 15 or older charged with first-degree murder can be transferred to adult court if the prosecution demonstrates that the nature of the offense and the offender's characteristics warrant adult prosecution. The transfer hearing, held in December 2023, would become the first major legal battle in a case that would captivate Chicago and generate intense debate about juvenile justice. The transfer hearing took place before Juvenile Court Judge Patricia Anderson, who would determine whether Marcus would face trial in juvenile court, where the maximum sentence would be detention until age 21, or, at most, 25, or adult criminal court, where he could face natural life imprisonment. The stakes could not have been higher. Prosecutor Morrison's argument for transfer was comprehensive and powerful. Your Honor, this case involves the premeditated murder of a police officer engaged in the lawful performance of his duties. The defendant, despite his age, demonstrated adult-level decision-making by carrying an illegal firearm, by choosing to shoot rather than comply with a lawful police order, and by firing multiple shots at close range to ensure his victim's death. His statements to police reveal a sophisticated understanding of the criminal justice system and a calculated belief that his age would insulate him from consequences. Morrison presented the video evidence, the confession, and expert testimony about Marcus's psychological profile. Dr. Robert Foster, a forensic psychologist retained by the prosecution, testified that Marcus demonstrated antisocial traits, lack of empathy, and poor prospects for rehabilitation within the limited time frame of the juvenile system. Marcus Williams exhibits characteristics associated with conduct disorder transitioning to antisocial personality disorder, Dr. Foster testified. He shows no genuine remorse for his victim, demonstrates instrumental violence to achieve a goal rather than impulsive violence, and has explicitly expressed the belief that the system cannot hold him accountable. His statement that he can do 8 years standing on his head reveals that he views potential incarceration as a minor inconvenience rather than a meaningful consequence. The juvenile system, with its rehabilitation focus and limited time frame, is unlikely to address his dangerousness. The defense, led by veteran juvenile advocate Robert Harrison, argued passionately that Marcus should remain in juvenile court despite the severity of his crime. Your Honor, Marcus Williams is 17 years old. His brain is still developing. The neuroscience is clear that adolescents have reduced capacity for impulse control, heightened emotional reactivity, and greater susceptibility to peer pressure and contextual factors. Marcus grew up in poverty, in a neighborhood plagued by violence, without a father, with a mother who worked constantly just to survive. These factors don't excuse what he did, but they provide context for understanding how a teenager could make such a catastrophic decision. Harrison presented testimony from Marcus's mother, Shanice, who described her son's difficult upbringing and her own guilt at being unable to provide adequate supervision due to working 2 jobs. He called educators who testified about Marcus's potential despite his troubled history. And he presented his own expert, Dr. Lisa Martinez, a developmental psychologist who testified about adolescent brain development and capacity for change. Adolescent brains, particularly in areas governing impulse control and long-term consequence assessment, are not fully mature, Dr. Martinez testified. Marcus's decision to shoot Officer Torres may have emerged from adolescent impulsivity, combined with the distorted thinking common in teens from high-crime environments where violence is normalized. Given appropriate intervention within a juvenile framework, Marcus could develop better decision-making capabilities and genuine remorse. Transferring him to adult court essentially gives up on his capacity for change at age 17. The legal arguments raged for 3 days of hearings, with both sides presenting compelling cases. Ultimately, Judge Anderson faced the difficult decision of balancing Marcus's age and theoretical capacity for rehabilitation against the severity of his crime and the danger he posed to society. Judge Anderson issued her ruling on December 22, 2023, in a detailed written order that granted the prosecution's motion to transfer Marcus to adult court. Her reasoning was thorough and would be cited extensively in subsequent appeals. This court has carefully considered the factors required by Illinois law for determining whether transfer to adult court is appropriate. Judge Anderson wrote, "The court acknowledges that Marcus Williams was 17 years old at the time of the offense, and that adolescent brain development research suggests continued maturation into the mid-20s. However, the court must balance these considerations against the specific facts of this case." Judge Anderson outlined the factors supporting transfer. The defendant committed the most serious offense recognized by our law, the murder of a peace officer. The murder was not impulsive, but involved the defendant carrying an illegal firearm, choosing to use that firearm rather than comply with a lawful police order, and firing multiple shots at close range. The defendant's statements to police reveal sophisticated understanding of the legal system and calculated belief that his age would shield him from consequences. His lack of genuine remorse and his repeated violations of probation in previous cases suggest limited amenability to rehabilitation within the juvenile system's time frame. The judge concluded, "While no 17-year-old should be written off as incapable of change, this defendant's specific characteristics and the nature of his offense warrant adult prosecution. The protection of public safety and the interests of justice require that Marcus Williams face trial in adult criminal court where the full range of sentencing options is available. The motion to transfer is granted." The transfer decision meant Marcus Williams would face trial in Cook County Criminal Court as an adult, eligible for the same sentences available for adult defendants, including natural life imprisonment without parole. His confident belief that his age would save him was already being proven disastrously wrong, but he apparently still didn't grasp the magnitude of what he faced. When we told Marcus about the transfer ruling, he still didn't seem to understand the implications, testified Harrison, his defense attorney. He said something like, "Okay, but I still get credit for being a minor when I did it, right? They still have to go easy on me." I tried to explain that being tried as an adult meant he could receive an adult sentence, including potentially natural life. He just looked at me like I was exaggerating to scare him. He absolutely did not believe that he could spend his entire life in prison. He remained confident that his age would ultimately result in a lenient sentence. The trial of Marcus Williams began on June 3, 2024, approximately 7 months after Officer Torres's murder. The case had generated enormous media attention both in Chicago and nationally, with coverage focusing on the youth of the defendant, the death of a police officer, and the debate about whether a 17-year-old should face the possibility of life without parole. Jury selection took 2 weeks, with extensive questioning of potential jurors about their views on juvenile offenders, police officers, gun violence, and the death penalty. Though Illinois had abolished capital punishment, prosecutors wanted jurors who could consider the harshest available sentence of natural life without parole. The final jury consisted of 7 women and 5 men, ranging in age from 24 to 68, with diverse racial and professional backgrounds. Prosecutor Morrison's opening statement was direct and powerful. On November 3, 2023, Officer Daniel Torres went to work to serve and protect the citizens of Chicago. He responded to a call about suspicious activity. He approached Marcus Williams professionally and respectfully. And Marcus Williams murdered him, shooting him 3 times at point-blank range. The defendant killed Officer Torres not because he was in danger. The video will show you Officer Torres made no threatening moves. He killed him because he didn't want to be questioned. He killed him because he thought he could get away with it. And he thought he could get away with it because he believed his age would shield him from consequences. Morrison outlined the evidence the jury would see, and hear the dash cam video showing the shooting in graphic detail. Officer Mitchell's testimony, the confession where Marcus admitted the shooting while explaining why he thought his age would protect him, and the expert testimony about Marcus's lack of remorse and poor rehabilitation prospects. By the end of this trial, you will have no doubt that Marcus Williams is guilty of first-degree murder, Morrison concluded. And you will understand why, despite his age, he deserves to be held fully accountable for taking Officer Daniel Torres's life. Defense attorney Harrison's opening statement emphasized Marcus's youth and the context of his upbringing. Marcus Williams is 17 years old. He made a terrible decision, a decision that cost Officer Torres his life and destroyed multiple families. But Marcus is still a child under the law, a teenager whose brain was not fully developed when he made that catastrophic choice. He grew up in one of Chicago's most violent neighborhoods. He watched friends and family members be victims of violence. He was raised in an environment where carrying a gun was normalized, where interactions with police were often confrontational, where violence was a survival mechanism. This doesn't excuse what he did, but it provides context for understanding how a 17-year-old could make such a horrible decision. Harrison previewed his defense strategy, not challenging Marcus's guilt, but arguing for the jury to see him as a child capable of change rather than an irredeemable killer. At the end of this trial, I will ask you to return a guilty verdict because the evidence is clear. But I will also ask you to remember that Marcus Williams is 17 years old, that he has the capacity for growth and change, and that the sentence you recommend should reflect both accountability for his crime and recognition of his youth and potential for rehabilitation. The prosecution's case proceeded systematically over 3 weeks. Officer Mitchell provided emotional testimony about responding to the call, approaching Marcus, and watching his partner get shot and die in his arms. The dashcam video was played in its entirety, with jurors watching in horrified silence as Marcus pulled his gun and fired 3 shots at Officer Torres, then stood over the fallen officer and made his callous comment. The medical examiner testified about Officer Torres's wounds and the trajectory of the bullets, explaining that all 3 shots would have been fatal and that Officer Torres had died quickly despite desperate medical intervention. Ballistics experts testified about recovering the murder weapon and matching it to the bullets extracted from Officer Torres's body. Detective Washington testified about the investigation, Marcus's arrest, and the interrogation where he had confessed while expressing confidence that his age would result in minimal consequences. The video of the interrogation was played in full, with jurors watching Marcus's casual demeanor, his lack of remorse, and his explicit statements about believing his age would shield him from serious punishment. When Marcus said, "I can do 8 years standing on my head," "What was your reaction?" Morrison asked Detective Washington. "I was shocked by his lack of understanding about what he was facing," Washington responded. He had just killed a police officer, and he thought he'd be out in his mid-20s. He had no concept that murdering a cop put him in a completely different category. He was arrogant, dismissive, and showed no genuine remorse for Officer Torres or his family. The most emotionally powerful testimony came from Rebecca Torres, Officer Torres's widow, who described her husband's dedication to his family and his career, and the devastating impact of his death on their children. "My kids have nightmares. Michael had to see a counselor because he was having panic attacks worrying that something would happen to me too." Sarah stopped dancing because her recitals reminded her that her dad wasn't there to watch. Emma asks every day when Daddy is coming home because she doesn't fully understand that he's never coming back. Marcus Williams took their father away from them, and they'll live with that loss for the rest of their lives. Rebecca's testimony was so powerful that several jurors were openly crying, and Judge Morrison had to call a brief recess to allow everyone to compose themselves. The image of the Torres children, young, innocent, permanently damaged by Marcus's choices, created a stark emotional counterpoint to any sympathy Marcus might have generated through his age. The defense's case was brief and focused entirely on context and mitigation. Harrison called Marcus's mother Shanice, who testified about raising her children in poverty, working constantly to provide for them, and her guilt at being unable to prevent Marcus's descent into street life. Her testimony was emotional, but didn't challenge the fundamental facts of Marcus's guilt. Harrison presented expert testimony about adolescent brain development from Dr. Martinez, who explained the neurological differences between teenagers and adults, and argued that 17-year-olds have reduced capacity for impulse control and long-term consequence assessment. However, Morrison's cross-examination was effective in establishing that Marcus's crime involved planning, carrying a gun, and decision-making, choosing to shoot rather than comply, inconsistent with pure impulsivity. The most controversial defense decision was whether to have Marcus testify. Harrison advised strongly against it, knowing that Marcus's lack of genuine remorse and his previous statements about his age protecting him would be catastrophic. But Marcus insisted on testifying, apparently still believing he could charm or manipulate the jury. Marcus's testimony was a disaster. Taking the stand dressed in a suit that made him look even younger than his 17 years, Marcus attempted to present himself as a scared kid who had made a terrible mistake. But his testimony quickly revealed the same arrogance and lack of genuine remorse that had characterized his police interrogation. "Why did you shoot Officer Torres?" Harrison asked, attempting to elicit a testimony about fear or panic. "I don't know, man. Everything happened so fast. He was coming at me and I panicked. I didn't mean to kill him. I just reacted." Marcus's response was wooden, clearly rehearsed, lacking authentic emotion. Morrison's cross-examination was devastating. She played the video again, showing Marcus pulling the gun deliberately, firing 3 calculated shots, and standing over Officer Torres making his callous comment. "Mr. Williams, does this look like panic to you? Does saying, 'That's what you get,' sound like someone who didn't mean to kill?" Marcus had no good answer. His story collapsed under questioning, and his true personality emerged defensive, arrogant, still convinced that his age should result in leniency. When Morrison asked whether he felt remorse for taking Officer Torres's life, Marcus's response was telling. "Yeah, I feel bad. It's messed up that he died. But it's not like I planned it or nothing. And I was only 17. I didn't understand the full consequences of what I was doing. My brain wasn't fully developed, like the expert said. So, yeah, I'm sorry it happened. But people need to understand I was just a kid." The testimony revealed no genuine remorse, only self-pity, and continued focus on his age as a shield. Several jurors later reported that Marcus's testimony eliminated any sympathy they might have felt for him despite his youth. Closing arguments reinforced the competing narratives. Morrison's closing was powerful and emotional, walking the jury through the evidence and asking them to hold Marcus accountable. Marcus Williams murdered Officer Daniel Torres in cold blood. He shot him 3 times at point-blank range. He showed no remorse. He told police he thought his age would protect him from consequences. And even now, even during this trial, he's focused not on the life he took, but on his belief that he should be given leniency because he was 17. Officer Torres's children don't get leniency from their grief. Rebecca Torres doesn't get relief from her loss. The community doesn't get safety from someone who murders police officers. Marcus Williams deserves to be convicted of first-degree murder. Harrison's closing emphasized Marcus's youth and capacity for change. Marcus Williams is 17 years old. He made a catastrophic decision that took Officer Torres's life and destroyed multiple families. But he's still a teenager with decades of life ahead of him. The question before you is not just whether he's guilty, the evidence makes that clear. The question is whether we as a society believe that a 17-year-old can change, can grow, can develop the capacity for genuine remorse and rehabilitation over time. I ask you to remember his age when you deliberate and when you consider what sentence to recommend. The jury deliberated for 9 hours over 2 days before announcing they had reached a verdict. The courtroom was packed when they returned police officers, victims' advocates, media, family members on both sides. Marcus sat at the defense table, still, appearing remarkably unconcerned given what was at stake. "Will the defendant please rise?" Judge Morrison instructed. Marcus stood, and for the first time, his expression showed genuine nervousness as the reality of the moment registered. "Madam Foreperson, has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor, we have." "What is your verdict?" "In the case of the State of Illinois versus Marcus Williams, on the charge of first-degree murder, we, the jury, find the defendant guilty." The courtroom erupted. Police officers stood in solidarity. Rebecca Torres and her children broke into sobs of relief. Spectators gasped and murmured. Marcus's face showed shock and dawning horror, as if he had genuinely not believed this outcome was possible, despite all the evidence. The guilty verdict triggered the sentencing phase, where the jury would hear additional evidence and recommend a sentence. Under Illinois law, for first-degree murder of a peace officer, sentencing options ranged from 20 years to natural life without parole. The prosecution was seeking the maximum natural life without parole, a sentence that would mean Marcus would never be released from prison. The sentencing phase lasted 2 weeks and featured extensive victim impact testimony and additional expert testimony about appropriate punishment and Marcus's rehabilitation prospects. Rebecca Torres and her children provided heartbreaking testimony about the impact of Daniel's death on their family. "My son Michael wants to be a police officer like his dad," Rebecca testified. "But he's terrified that if he becomes a cop, someone will kill him too, and his children will grow up without a father like he did." Sarah has nightmares, where she relives finding out about her dad's death. Emma still sets a place for him at dinner sometimes because she forgets he's not coming home. Marcus Williams didn't just kill my husband. He killed my children's father, their sense of security, their innocence. They'll carry this trauma for the rest of their lives. Dozens of police officers testified about Officer Torres's character and dedication, and about the broader impact of his murder on the law enforcement community. "When an officer is murdered, it affects every cop in the city," testified Police Superintendent David Martinez. "It reminds us that we put our lives on the line every day. It makes us more cautious, more suspicious, more aware of our mortality." Officer Torres's death has had a chilling effect on community policing in Chicago because officers are now more afraid to engage with residents the way Danny did, openly, trustingly. Marcus Williams didn't just kill one officer. He damaged the relationship between police and the community that Danny worked so hard to build. The prosecution presented expert testimony that Marcus's lack of genuine remorse and his continued focus on his age as a mitigating factor demonstrated that he remained dangerous and unlikely to be successfully rehabilitated. Dr. Foster testified that Marcus's psychological profile suggested high risk for future violence if ever released. The defense presented testimony about Marcus's difficult childhood, his mother's poverty and struggle to provide supervision, and the environmental factors that had shaped his development. Expert testimony emphasized Marcus's youth and the possibility of change over decades of incarceration. Harrison argued passionately that natural life without a parole was too harsh for a 17-year-old, and that a sentence allowing for eventual parole review after 40 or 45 years would balance accountability with recognition of his youth. The jury deliberated on sentencing for 12 hours over 3 days before announcing their recommendation. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, as everyone awaited the decision that would determine whether Marcus Williams would have any possibility of eventual release or would spend the rest of his life behind bars. We, the jury, recommend that Marcus Williams be sentenced to natural life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, the foreperson announced, reading from the sentencing form. The recommendation was not binding on Judge Morrison, but it carried significant weight. The judge scheduled formal sentencing for August 15, 2024, approximately 9 months after Officer Torres's murder, giving both sides time to prepare final statements and giving himself time to draft the comprehensive sentencing order required in such a serious case. The sentencing hearing on August 15, 2024, would become one of the most memorable in recent Chicago legal history, not just for the severity of the sentence, but for Judge Morrison's extraordinary statement from the bench, a judicial rebuke of Marcus Williams that captured the frustration and anger many felt about a teenager who had killed a police officer while believing his age would shield him from consequences. Judge Morrison began by formally imposing the sentence. Marcus Williams, you have been found guilty of first-degree murder of a peace officer by a jury of your peers, and that jury has unanimously recommended that you be sentenced to natural life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. After careful consideration of all the evidence, the victim impact statements, the expert testimony, and the arguments of counsel, this court concurs with the jury's recommendation and hereby sentences you to natural life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge paused, allowing the weight of the sentence to register before delivering the extraordinary personal statement that would define the hearing. You killed a police officer, a husband, a father, a man who dedicated his life to protecting this community. And you did it with a smile on your face, believing that your age would shield you from the consequences of your actions. Judge Morrison's voice rose with intensity. Throughout this case, you have demonstrated a stunning lack of remorse and an arrogant confidence that your age would save you. You told police you could do 8 years standing on your head. You told detectives that you knew how the system worked and that juveniles don't face serious time. You murdered Officer Torres believing you would be inconvenienced for a few years and then released to continue your life. You were wrong. The judge addressed Marcus directly. You will spend the rest of your natural life in prison. You will never be released. You will never have a family of your own. You will never have a career. You will never experience the freedoms that most people take for granted. You will grow old behind bars, and you will die behind bars, decades from now when you're in your 70s or 80s, having spent your entire adult life incarcerated. Judge Morrison's statement became even more pointed. Your age does not excuse what you did. Being 17 didn't prevent you from carrying an illegal gun. Being 17 didn't prevent you from making the calculated decision to shoot a police officer rather than comply with a lawful order. Being 17 didn't prevent you from firing 3 times to ensure Officer Torres died. And being 17 doesn't prevent this court from holding you fully accountable for your actions. The judge addressed the broader implications of the case. This sentence sends a message to other young people who might believe that their age shields them from consequences for serious crimes. It doesn't. If you commit adult crimes, particularly the murder of a police officer, you will face adult consequences. Your age is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. It is not a license to commit violence without accountability. Judge Morrison concluded with words directed at Marcus personally. You thought your age would save you. You were confident you'd beat the system. You were arrogant enough to kill a police officer believing you'd be back on the streets in a few years. Today, you learn that you were catastrophically wrong. You will spend the rest of your life, potentially, 60, 70, or more years in prison, with decades to contemplate the magnitude of what you did and the terrible price you're paying for your arrogance and your violence. As Judge Morrison finished speaking, Marcus Williams finally showed genuine emotion, not remorse for his victim, but horror and devastation at his own fate. He had walked into that courtroom still clinging to some belief that his age would result in leniency. He left understanding that he would never be free again, that his confident assumptions had been utterly wrong, and that he would spend the rest of his life paying the price for murdering Officer Daniel Torres. Marcus Williams was transported to Illinois Department of Corrections custody immediately after sentencing, beginning his natural life sentence at age 17. He was initially housed at a facility with other youthful offenders before eventually being transferred to adult population. He would spend his late teens, his 20s, his 30s, and all subsequent decades behind bars, his entire adult life consumed by the consequences of believing his age would save him. The case generated extensive media coverage for months after the sentencing, with particular focus on Judge Morrison's powerful statement and the severity of the sentence for someone so young. The case reignited debates about juvenile justice, about appropriate punishment for teenagers who commit serious crimes, and about the tension between recognizing adolescent brain development and holding young offenders accountable for their actions. Legal experts debated whether natural life without parole for a 17-year-old was appropriate or excessively harsh. The Marcus Williams case presents the classic tension in juvenile justice between rehabilitation and accountability, commented Professor Sarah Mitchell, a juvenile law expert at Northwestern University. On one hand, we have substantial neuroscience showing that 17-year-old brains are still developing, and that adolescents have greater capacity for change than adults. On the other hand, we have a deliberate, calculated murder of a police officer by someone who explicitly believed his age would shield him from consequences. The question is whether our recognition of adolescent development should result in leniency even for the most serious crimes. Supporters of the sentence argued that Marcus's case demonstrated why age alone shouldn't preclude severe punishment. Marcus Williams didn't commit this crime impulsively, argued victims' rights advocate Jennifer Walsh. He carried a gun to the encounter. He made a calculated decision to shoot rather than comply. He fired 3 times to ensure his victim died, and his statements reveal that he did all of this believing his age would protect him. The sentence appropriately balances his youth with the severity of his crime and his dangerous mindset. Opponents of the sentence argued that condemning anyone to die in prison for actions committed at 17 violated evolving standards of decency. The brain science is clear 17-year-olds are not fully mature adults, argued Maria Santos of the Illinois Juvenile Justice Coalition. Marcus Williams committed a terrible crime, but condemning him to natural life without parole essentially declares him irredeemable at age 17. That's inconsistent with everything we know about adolescent development and capacity for change. Life with possibility of parole after 40 years would provide accountability while recognizing his youth. Appeals were filed immediately, challenging both the transfer to adult court and the natural life sentence as cruel and unusual punishment for a juvenile offender. These appeals would work through Illinois state courts and eventually federal courts, a process likely to take years before exhaustion of all legal remedies. The case also had broader policy implications in Illinois and nationally. Legislators debated whether to raise the age threshold for transferring juveniles to adult court or to create categorical prohibitions on natural life without parole for offenders under 18. The Marcus Williams case became a reference point in these debates, cited by both sides to support their positions. For Officer Daniel Torres's family, the sentence provided some measure of justice but couldn't ease their grief. Rebecca Torres and her children continued navigating life without Daniel, struggling with trauma and loss while trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. The sentence doesn't bring Danny back, Rebecca stated in an interview after the sentencing. "My kids still don't have their father. I still don't have my husband. But there's something to be said for knowing that Marcus Williams will never be able to hurt anyone else's family the way he hurt ours. He took Danny's life believing he'd get away with it because of his age. Now he knows differently. Now he'll spend the rest of his life behind bars. It doesn't make us whole, but it's something." The Torres children continued therapy to process their trauma and loss. Michael, the oldest at 14, struggled with anger toward Marcus and toward a system that had previously treated Marcus leniently, despite his criminal history. Sarah continued having nightmares and anxiety. Emma, the youngest, struggled to understand why her father was never coming home. The family's journey of grief and healing would continue for years, perhaps for the rest of their lives. For Marcus Williams's family, the case brought different but equally devastating trauma. Shanice Williams struggled with guilt about her son's actions and grief over losing him to life imprisonment. "I know what Marcus did was terrible," she said in a rare interview. "Officer Torres didn't deserve to die. His family didn't deserve to lose him. But Marcus is my son. I love him despite what he did. And it breaks my heart that he'll spend his entire life in prison, that he made such a terrible choice at 17 that cost him everything. I wish I could have done more to prevent it. I wish I'd been home more, paid more attention, gotten him help sooner. I'll carry that guilt forever." Marcus's sister Destiny, 14 at the time of the sentencing, lost her brother to imprisonment and gained the stigma of being related to a cop killer. She changed schools to escape the association and struggled with depression and anxiety related to her brother's crime and sentence. From prison, Marcus's adjustment to his sentence was reportedly difficult. Prison psychological evaluations described him as struggling with depression, showing belated remorse, though questions remained about whether it was genuine or performative, and grappling with the reality of spending his entire life incarcerated. Marcus has expressed regret about his actions, reported prison counselor Dr. Robert Martinez in an evaluation conducted 6 months after sentencing. He states that he understands he made a terrible decision and that he wishes he could take it back. However, there's a quality to his expressions of remorse that feels somewhat superficial. He seems to regret the consequences to himself more than the harm he caused to Officer Torres and his family. He's also expressed anger at his defense attorney for not doing enough and at the judge for being too harsh, suggesting he still doesn't fully accept responsibility for his situation. Marcus did grant one interview to a journalist studying juvenile lifers, conducted approximately 1 year after his sentencing. The interview provided some insight into his current mindset and whether he had developed genuine understanding of the magnitude of his crime. When asked what he thought about now, Marcus responded, "I think about how stupid I was. I really believed I'd be out by 25. I thought being 17 meant the system couldn't really touch me. I was so wrong. I'm going to be here for the rest of my life. I'll never have a family, never have a career, never do anything outside these walls. It's starting to hit me what natural life really means." When the interviewer asked whether he felt remorse for Officer Torres, Marcus's answer was telling. "Yeah, I feel bad about what happened to him. He had a family, and I took him away from them. That's messed up. But I also feel like the system failed me too. I was 17. My brain wasn't fully developed. I didn't get the help I needed when I was younger. And now I'm paying for it for the rest of my life. It feels like they're giving up on me, saying I can never change. That's hard." The response revealed continued self-focus and limited genuine empathy for his victim, suggesting that Marcus's remorse remained more about his own fate than about the harm he caused. Whether decades of incarceration would yield different results remained to be seen. As of late 2025, Marcus Williams remains incarcerated, his appeals ongoing but facing long odds given the overwhelming evidence of his guilt and the aggravating factors present in his case. He has decades of imprisonment ahead of him. He is now 19 years old and will likely be behind bars into his 70s or 80s. His entire adult life consumed by the consequences of believing his age would save him from accountability for murdering a police officer. The case remains a landmark in juvenile justice debates, cited frequently in discussions about appropriate punishment for serious crimes committed by teenagers. It illustrates the tension between recognizing adolescent brain development and holding young offenders accountable for heinous acts. It demonstrates the dangers of juvenile offenders developing a sense of invulnerability based on assumptions about lenient treatment. And it serves as a stark warning to other young people who might believe that age shields them from consequences for serious crimes. Judge Morrison's words at sentencing, "You thought your age would save you. You were wrong," captured the essence of Marcus Williams's catastrophic miscalculation. He murdered a police officer believing he would serve a few years and be released. Instead, he received natural life without parole, a sentence that ensures he will never be free again. Officer Daniel Torres's legacy lives on through his children, through the community he served, and through the law enforcement officers who continue his mission of protecting and serving despite the dangers they face. His death was not in vain if it serves as a reminder of the sacrifice police officers make daily and the need to hold those who target them fully accountable regardless of age. For Marcus Williams, his legacy is one of arrogance, violence, and miscalculation. He took a life believing his age would shield him from consequences. He showed no genuine remorse, focusing instead on his belief that the system would go easy on him. And he learned, too late, that murdering a police officer carries the ultimate price regardless of how old you are when you commit the crime. The case stands as a sobering reminder that actions have consequences, that age does not grant immunity from accountability for heinous crimes, and that assumptions about the legal system based on ignorance and arrogance can prove catastrophically wrong. Marcus Williams thought his age would save him. Instead, it became merely a footnote to a case about a teenager who murdered a police officer and will spend the rest of his life paying the price for his crime and his hubris.